Thank you so much for coming. Like, I'm so honored to be here. This is so awesome. And thanks for the organizers for having me. Yeah. Tools versus rules. My name is Fleur van Leusden. I'm the CISO for the Dutch Electoral Council, but I'm not actually here representing them today. This is just something I like to do on the side. And I'm here to talk to you about the shift I see more and more in security, where we tend to feel comfortable mitigating risk by just making a rule that says you're not allowed to do this. So let's talk about that for a bit. So in order to do that, I'm going to take you back when I used to work as a software test engineer. And let me tell you, if you ever get tired or bored, you're not going to get bored with security. If you ever get tired of security and you want to make a switch, become a software engineer. Like, that's just one block next to what we're doing, because, you know, the great thing is you get to point out where people are failing, but you don't have to come up with the solution for it. You just have to tell them, this shit's not working. Solve it. Awesome. And, you know, we kind of like that. Plus, as a bonus, you get to make developers cry, which is awesome. But anyway, I used to work as a software test engineer. And when you've done this job, and probably if you're a security tester, you've done something similar, you like to do the thing where Didi in Dexter is, I know, I'm old, from the Cartoon Network series went, ooh, what does this button do? And then I would fill in some kind of weird character in a text field, and I would go to a developer and say, well, this application completely crashes when I put a question mark in this text field. You might want to look into this. And a lot of the times, a developer, after crying, would say, but people don't do that. People, you know, it's a name field. Why would anyone put a question mark in a name field? And of course, the answer is, well, 9 times out of 10, no one's going to do it. But do you really want your application to crash when someone types their name? Probably not. And the reason I put this quote here is because I've actually heard it a lot when working in security as well. So this quote right here is something I've heard in many, many risk analysis workshops that I led, where, for example, I would say there's a risk that if we allow people to download torrents, they will download malware. So we might want to block torrents, because there's no feasible reason why anyone would want to download torrents on our office network. And someone would say, "Well, just make a rule. We'll just make a rule that says don't download torrents. You don't have to block torrents. Just make a rule. Don't download torrents." And then I would go, "That's not going to work, because someday someone is going to try it and it's going to install malware." No, but our people don't do that. Our people, they are all highly educated. If we make a rule that says do not download torrents, they will never do this. And my answer is always the same. Yes, they will. And why, my dear friends, is something I will illustrate with these images right here. People do really stupid things. Things that will make you go, why? Why would you do this? And a funny story is that it actually, I can tell you, because this is a women's conference, it actually took me effort to find a picture of a woman doing something stupid, because it's way easier to find pictures. I'm sorry, you guys. But I did, in my defense, I did find a picture, and I really searched for it, because I don't want to make you guys look like it's all... But that's what I looked for, you know. It's easier. And, you know, of course, this is all giggles and funny and that kind of thing. And, of course, you can make this a black and white discussion like I did actually with the title of the presentation, where I said tools versus rules. It's not that simple. So you can block torrents. That's not going to guarantee that never ever in the history of your company anyone's going to succeed in somehow downloading a torrent. Because, you know, there's some levels of stupidity that there's nothing you can do about it, which is illustrated right there. Yeah, that's awesome. Anyway, And I always like to show some examples. So I'm not just talking from my own experience. Not too long ago, actually, there was a story about Tesla in Germany, I believe, where they had a data breach, and they only found out because the media came to them and said, you know, someone offered us your data. We just had to pay this amount of money and they would give us the data. And they used to work for you, or so they said. And this is how Tesla found that out. And I loved their response to this. Let me just read it in case you can't read it. The investigation revealed that 2 former Tesla employees misappropriated the information in violation, this is the point, in violation of Tesla's IT security and data protection policies, and shared it with the media outlet. So they had a rule that said, do not share our information with the media. That was a policy, apparently. But somehow it did happen. Against the rule that said, do not do this, it happened. And because they apparently had no technical means of detecting this, they also had no idea it actually happened until someone came to them and told them this happened. So not only did they have no technical measures to stop people from doing this, they also had no measures to detect people doing this. So yeah, this is why I like to give this example. So why do we actually like to do this? You know, there's a reason why people do what they do. We like rules because rules are generally cheaper. It's way cheaper to have a rule that says do not download child pornography, or like we call it, child sexual assault material, or Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Anyway, same acronym. But it's cheaper. Yeah, so we like that. And it's easier to implement. We just write it down. We write down, you do not download torrents. Done. Implemented. Well, if you have a technical measure, you have to go into your firewall, you have to set rules, you have to test to make sure it works, you have to update things, you have to manage them. It's way harder. And like I said, it requires minimum maintenance. If it's a rule, you just go back to the rule once every year, go, yes, still a solid rule, let's keep that rule. And you're done. So that's why we like rules better. And we like to use user agreements and that kind of thing that nobody ever reads. And even if they would read it and they would disagree, they still had to sign it. Otherwise, you wouldn't give them their laptop or iPhone or whatever. So yeah, the user agreements that say do not download torrents or do not click suspicious links. Yeah, the classic our people don't do that. I like to use this example to illustrate how stupid this actually is, which is when we build balconies. I don't know if you have a balcony at home, but most balconies these days, they have railings to make sure that you don't fall off your balcony. They don't really have like a sign that says do not fall off the balcony, or we don't do awareness training to train people not to fall off balconies. We have railings. Now, does this 100% prevent people falling off balconies? No, there is a level of stupidity, or sometimes simply an accident, where people still fall off balconies. But that does not make it a good idea to then do awareness surrounding falling off balconies or signs. No, we still stick to the railings because generally speaking, it's just a better idea. And that's my point actually in this presentation. But to look a little closer, when you have rules, there's always people that find that a rule does not apply to them for some reason, or they have a reason why they do not follow a rule. And these are all perfectly wonderful reasons why people do not follow rules. They either weren't aware of it, they don't agree with it, they think it's stupid, they had a deadline. There's all sorts of reasons why people don't follow rules, why the quote I said earlier, our people don't do that, just simply doesn't always apply. And then the inevitable discussion that I tend to end up with when I talk about this kind of thing is that people come to me, they say, Fleur, but all that's going to happen with all your blocking of things on the network, it's just going to end up having people take their stuff to shadow IT. They're just going to go to shadow IT and do it anyway, which is much less safe. And I disagree. I think neither tools or rules will prevent this. So you can have a rule that says do not download torrents. It's not going to prevent people from doing it either on your network or outside of your network. So you can block it and they'll do it outside of your network, or they'll find a way around it. Or if you do not block it, they will do it on your network. And it's not really about the notion of thinking that you can ever 100% prevent people from doing something. It's more about responsibility. Because when you have a rule that says do not download torrents, and not only do you have the rule, but you also have torrents blocked from your network, and someone still tries and circumvent all of this to do this, then there's a shift in responsibility that goes from you as an employer or security towards that employee. Because now the employee cannot really use any of the excuses that I showed you earlier. I was not aware of this rule. Then why did you think we blocked torrents? I do not agree with this rule. Well, then if you were to go around it, you had to talk to your manager and say, well, I need this for this and that reason. Please allow me to do this, or agree with me doing this, or that kind of thing. If you do it in secret, then the responsibility for the security of your organization, there's a point where it shifts from you as an organization to the employee, and I think that you need to make that point as sharp and distinguishable as possible. And I think it's simply not realistic to believe that if you just make a rule that says do not do something, then that it will never happen. That's not to say that you can't have any rules about anything. I'm going to get back to that in a second. Yes, you should have rules for many things. You just shouldn't rely on people being aware of all the rules and being able to apply them whenever necessary. And like I said, it's not really as black and white as I painted it in the beginning. It's not really either tools or rules. It's not either technical measure or policies. It's mainly both. There's nothing wrong with having technical measures in place as well as a rule. Actually, I think if you have a technical measure that blocks something, there should be a policy that says we block torrents on our network for this and this reason. And you're not allowed because it has a risk or that kind of thing. And then you have a technical measure that enforces the rule. So it's actually better to have rules and have your technical measures be based on those rules, because they create more understanding from your employees. But sometimes, as a CISO, I've noticed this as well, you have to make a choice. You're told there's simply no budget, or there's no time, and then you have to choose: are we going to ask for more budget to implement this technical measure, or are we just going to go with the rule that says do not do this and accept the fact that there's a high risk someone someday will still do it? And I think that if you ever went to one of my talks before, you know I'm not a great fan of the many awareness type campaigns that our industry likes to implement. But I think awareness does have a role here. So if you have a rule and a technical measure that actually goes with that rule, you can use awareness to try and minimize shadow IT. Because if people understand why something is not allowed, and if you show them the allowed alternatives to that, and explain that maybe this is less efficient than we transfer, but it's more safe, or maybe you'd be inclined to email this to your Hotmail account, but we would like you to use this other software instead. That's way more effective to prevent shadow IT than it is to just have a rule that says don't do it, but make it possible anyway. And yeah, we like to talk about culture these days. It's kind of, we had governance first and now we talk about culture a lot. But I think that it's comparable to, I've heard like oil platforms in the North Sea where people tell each other to hold on to the railings or have their hard hat on outside. I think it's similar for security in a way. So when someone is doing something, when you see an Outlook invite going to someone's Hotmail account, you should have a culture where someone says, I saw this is going to your Hotmail account. Why are you not using your corporate account? That kind of thing. Because of course, it's also possible to have technical measures to prevent it, but sometimes it enforces each other. So yeah. That's basically my talk. I know it's quite short. I try to talk a lot more than I usually do, which is actually a lot. But I'm sure that there are people here that, have a different opinion or would like to ask me a few questions. So if you have a question for me, or if you'd like to say I'm totally wrong, which I understand, feel free to raise your hand so we can, talk about it. Not all at once. Just put this down.
So, I really enjoyed your talk. It's a great talk. It's actually really interesting because I come from a medical device background. And we've actually watched our ISO standard and guidance go back and forth on this. And so the one question I do have for you is, if you have to rely on labeling, right, having a policy and not a technical measure, is it appropriate to still consider that a risk reduction, or is that just a compensating measure, but you consider the risk the same because you have no technical implementation that's actually stopping it?
So what you're wondering is, if you have no technical measure, but you have a policy that says don't do this, did you mitigate the risk in any possible way? In my personal opinion, no. Because of the pictures I showed you earlier. If you have a large enough organization, for example, before I worked at the Dutch Electoral Council, I worked for the Dutch Authority for Consumers and Markets, the ACM. There's 600 people there. And this is the organization where someone in a workshop told me, our people don't do that because they're all highly educated. When you have 600 people somewhere, someone is going to click a link. Someone is going to do something really dumb, even though you have a rule that says don't do this really dumb thing. For me, when I do risk workshops and someone goes, either our people don't do that, or let's just make a rule and be done with it, I leave the residual risk the same. There's nothing that happens to the impact. There's nothing that happens to the chance because of what I just said. Someone is going to do this, rule or no rule, if you don't enforce it. So yeah, but a good question though. Oh dear, Mendel.
Yes. Hello.
End of presentation. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, okay. I know. Because with technical measures, you're technically blocking things or not, or making things possible. But if you only have rules, what is the risk of malicious compliance?
What do you mean?
I mean that it's like writing rules is hard. Writing good rules is very hard. So if you have a rule that says you cannot do this, and then exactly that is your job because you have to do that all day, and that rule doesn't really apply to you, but somebody stupidly wrote it wrong, and it's only then it starts to be compliant on all those rules, and there are a lot of rules within the government. How is that risk?
Yeah, talking from personal experience, right? Yeah. Well, then my opinion would be it's a bad rule. If rules should not prevent people from doing their job. So I, as a CISO as well, I don't like to make rules or policies or something that are actually impossible to follow. What is the point? And I don't like making rules for people. I like to make rules with people. So if I have a rule or a policy that says that something shouldn't be possible, then it's always, before it's enforced, it's always discussed within the organization if everyone agrees that this is doable. If someone somewhere says, well, that means I can't do my job anymore, then we have to go back to the drawing board and say, well, this is not going to fly. We're either going to have to make an exception for this person or this team or whatever, and we can formalize that as a good civil servant would. But yeah, we'd have to do something about the rule, as well as technical measures. Or about your job. Yeah, you're right. See, there's another question over there. Yeah. Yeah, you invented a new word, malicious compliance, right? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you for your presentation. My question was, is there also like a middle ground? So you say it's either rules or tools. Sometimes enforcing a rule could help as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said earlier, it's not, I like to make things black and white because it makes it more interesting to talk about it. But you're right, it's more nuanced than that. It's actually better to have a rule first and then enforce it with technical measures than have either a technical measure that's based on nothing or a rule that has no enforcement on the technical side. So the combination is actually what I'm trying to achieve.
Cool. And could you also enforce it without a technical component?
That's actually a brilliant question, because that's what I see a lot of people trying to do. So you have a rule, you don't want to enforce it with technical measures, so what do? You do awareness. But you bombard people with awareness. You send them fake phishing emails, you have them, if they fail the training, they have to redo the training, and you do it every week because you have to do it often, because if you only do it once a year, it's not effective. As you can see, I'm a great fan of this strategy. No, I don't think I think it's, I can actually have talks about this, so I'm going to try and keep it short. But I think that kind of strategy is not very effective, because it will, again, there's always going to be someone in those 600 people that's still going to not understand the point and do whatever the thing is you don't want them to do. And it's distracting people from their actual jobs, because you're taking time away from what they're supposed to be doing to listen to your awareness speech, posters, link, whatever. And like I said, I don't think it's effective enough. One of the talks I did a while back about phishing campaigns, that I said, if your entire network security relies on no one ever clicking a link or opening a false malware attachment, may the odds be forever in your favor, and do a lot of awareness in that case. But yeah, I'm afraid, yeah. There's multiple questions. Very good, very good.
You talked about culture change, which is, in my experience, one of the hardest things to do. I would rather set up a technical measure than try to do a culture change.
That's right.
In your experience, are there any practical tips that you've used to bring about that culture change in the organizations that you've been with?
I think it's the classical thing that if you want culture to change, you have to start from the top. So you, as a CISO or whoever wants to achieve a culture change, has to have backing from the highest up in the organization, and they have to vigorously apply it to themselves as well. I've seen CEOs refusing to sign user agreements and still get their laptops, which is, in my book, it's really odd. But that's what I mean. If you want to make a culture change, it has to come from the top, and they have to vigorously enforce it. So even if the CEO would walk around the office and see someone not doing what they're trying to achieve, that person should actually talk to whoever they see not doing it and go, what's happening? I see you not adhering to this. Is there something wrong? Do you need help? That kind of thing. So if you want a culture change, it has to come from the top, and it has to, like I just said, you have to keep repeating whatever it is you want people to do. And also, when new people come in, they have to adjust to this culture. So culture change, it's easier said than done. Like you said, it's easier to have a technical measure in place than to change the culture. I'm glad I quit earlier, because there's actually quite a lot of questions.
I have a follow-up question on that, and maybe a dangerous one. So we live in a world where CEOs can get their laptop without signing the paper, which is actually just telling, I will promise to follow the rule, right? And I come from an accountants organization in the
so
past.
So you like rules.
So I know, no, but I know that, I mean, we have recently seen that
Yeah.
partners cheat on their tests themselves. So I'm talking about management, about the C-level. Do you apply tools there as well?
Yes. Actually, when I worked for the ACM and where I'm working right now, one of the first things I do as a CISO is I write what I call a vision on security. And it's basically just one piece of paper, one A4 paper that outlines the basic principles that this organization is going to stick to when it comes to security. And I like to put in that technical measures will always be preferable over policy-based measures, like 100% policy-based measures, for the reasons I just outlined. And that's the basis of all the security that I do. So then when I have a request for a technical measure that costs money or time or whatever, and the C-level executive says, well, we don't have the time, or we can't really make the budget free for this, then I go, remember this piece of paper you agreed to when I started? It says right here that we will prefer technical measures over policy-based. So do you still think this is valid, or should we change this? Sometimes that tips the scale. So that's how I like to work on this, because I understand even for C-level, it's easier to say, just make a rule that says we don't do it. And we can finish the project on time or that kind of thing. Maybe that would be helpful. I don't know.
Yeah, no, thank you.
There's one in the back.
So my question is about awareness campaigns. So typically they are used to influence behavior and communicate about the rules. I'm a big fan about the thing you mentioned about communicating why something is blocked or what the alternatives are. My question is about, can awareness campaigns be used in a way to drive change of these technical controls? For example, by being targeted towards management teams or security officers? Or should an awareness campaign always be after the fact? So the question basically is, can awareness be used to drive change in technical measures?
It's a good question. I think both. It's a stupid answer, but it's a good question. You can do both. So personally, I like to have once a year, I have a week-long awareness campaign for the entire organization, which is always the hardest one because it has to be general. So it has to apply to as many people in the organization as possible without being a fake phishing email, because then I look stupid because I stand on the stage saying that's not a good idea. So that makes it a lot harder, because that's 9 times out of 10 what CISOs do. We just send fake phishing emails, so that's out of question for me. So yeah, I like to do one large awareness campaign for the entire organization, which is usually based on a policy. So we have a policy that says you do not send non-public information through WeTransfer. You use this secure transfer service that we have. And then I build the awareness campaign around it, but I try and avoid ever saying the sentence I just said. I invite people that are hackers to show interesting techniques on how to hack things, because it's always more interesting to listen to the adversary side than the defensive side. So it's boring to listen to me saying, use the secure transfer platform we have. But it's interesting to hear a hacker say, well, if you use WeTransfer, this is one way we can get to your information. We can infect it with malware or anything like that. And then at the end of the whole presentation, so it's wise to use the secure transfer platform. So that's one thing I do. And then I like to make custom awareness, like short e-learnings or short bursts of information. Whenever I see a team struggling with something in the security related subject, for example, cloud security is something that a lot of organizations still struggle with because it's relatively new when you've always hosted your own network. So I like when you have admins that have to manage Azure or something like that for the first time. I like to show them the classic failures or mistakes or S3 buckets, as we all are so probably very familiar with. Yeah, we love those, don't we? So yeah, there's like a couple of standard things that admins can do wrong in cloud that I then specifically target them with awareness for. So yeah, it's actually both. You do custom awareness for certain teams, and then you do a large awareness for your entire organization, if possible.
All right, thank you.
I was just wondering, we all know the basic stuff for securing our environment and network and everything, but how do you make sure people actually don't do stupid shit? Where do you start?
Where do you start? You start with the risk, I think. So you have to identify there's a risk here. There's a risk if someone does this. Yes, of course. But that's why you have workshops with risk analysis where you invite those people to come and experts to come sit together and go, there's whole strategies of how to do this. But what are all the things we can think of that can go wrong here? And that can be people-based, it can be technical, it can be environmental even, there can be floods, fires, whatever. What can impact this thing that we are trying to secure? And after you have the risk insight, then you can think about, well, what can we do to prevent this, or what can we do to minimize the impact, or both? So then you find measures to mitigate the risk, and this can perfectly fine be a rule, depending on your, here we go, risk appetite. I don't like this word. But I don't have another word for it. But yeah, if you think, well, if this does happen, the impact is low, so we can do fine with just the rule that says don't click this or don't do this, because if they do it, we have other things in place that won't make it have that much impact. But if the impact is high, then I as a CISO would advise against having only a rule that says don't do it, because the chances are it's gonna happen. And then that's when you have the discussion, what technical measures can we put in place to still prevent this from happening, even if someone tries to do it anyway. But I agree, there is no such thing as you have a policy and you have a technical measure, so this will never happen. No, it can still go wrong. There's no such thing as 100% secure, of course. But you do whatever is within your power and your responsibility as an organization.
Hi, thanks for the talk. It's very interesting. I liked your example with the A4 paper of principles for the C-level. And it sounded to me like that's actually a set of rules that C-level has said yes to. And you were able to then go back and leverage those rules to potentially make a decision come in your favor for the budget, for the technical measure. So it seems to me maybe there are different types of rules. You talk a lot about the rules that we have to, the only thing you can do with them is to have awareness training, and it doesn't work because one person will still do something stupid. But what about these other types of rules where people actually say, yes, that's my responsibility, I'm accepting this principle, or maybe even put in a process to enforce the rule, like we always take references when we hire people, that's also a rule, right?
Right. So, if I understand you correctly, what you're asking is, I mentioned earlier that I make a vision statement that's a 1A4 paper that's basically rules, but for CEOs, which is always better. That says, well, remember when we agreed that we would do this, and now you have chosen to not adhere to these rules, right? And then what do you do? And this is my go-to phrase that I use when people also sometimes ask me, how do you sleep at night when you're a CISO, knowing that any given moment something could go wrong, it's all your fault? And I go, it's not my responsibility. This is not my organization. I am not responsible for the entire security of this whole organization. I am an advisor. So I will just advise you to adhere to the principles that we all agree to. But if you are the CEO, you have the power and the authority to whatever thing you agreed to yesterday, completely ignore the day after. Just one question for me, please write it down in an email or somewhere else and sign it, so that whenever this happens, what I warned you for, I can go, well, remember, you agreed to this, you accepted this risk, or you Yeah, we talked about this going against the vision statement that we had, and you still thought it was a great idea, remember? Because, sometimes CEOs, they forget things. So yeah, that would be my advice. Make sure it's written down somewhere.
I guess my real question is, aren't there some rules that do make sense and that you can enforce by having a process and people taking responsibility?
Yeah, it's actually harder to enforce rules with technical measures when it comes to CEOs. That is the right conclusion, yes. I believe we are out of time, right? Oh. Well,
yeah, sorry I ghosted on you.
I can't really dance, so that's difficult. And I can't sing either, so yeah,
that's
let's
fine.
just leave it at that.
Yeah. I ghosted on you. I was looking for the back door, couldn't find it. But, yeah. So here is your bag. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
This is a special bag. No
I
one
have
has
a special
it.
bag.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I don't know what's in there, but
mystery
it'll be
bag.
special. Yeah. There's a device in there that can listen to stuff.
Does it tick?
Yes.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay. Give a round of applause. Thank you so much.